The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the small wooden building that served as Ely's general store, and Eleanor Owens pressed one trembling hand against the dusty window, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. 3 weeks of travel from Boston had left her dress stained, her hair a tangled mess beneath her bonnet, and her hope worn thin as parchment. She had come to Nevada territory in 1874 as a mail-order bride to a man she had never met, and now that the journey had finally ended, fear gripped her throat like a fist. The door swung open, and the driver, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained whiskers, offered his hand. "This here is Ely, miss. Your intended should be waiting." Eleanor accepted his help on unsteady legs, her boots touching the packed dirt of the main street. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and she swayed slightly, exhaustion making the world tilt. She had barely eaten during the last leg of the journey, her stomach too knotted with anxiety to accept much food. The few other passengers dispersed quickly, leaving her standing alone with her single trunk, scanning the handful of people moving about the dusty street. A man approached, tall and lean with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. He wore work-worn denim trousers, dusty boots, and a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. A Stetson sat low on his head, shading his face, but she could see the strong line of his jaw and the gentle set of his mouth. He stopped a few feet away, removing his hat to reveal dark brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Miss Owens." His voice was deep and careful, with a hint of uncertainty that matched her own. "Yes." Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Are you Mr. Callahan?" "I am, Garrett Callahan." He twisted the hat in his hands, and she noticed the calluses on his palms, the strength in his fingers. "I am mighty glad you made it safely. The journey must have been difficult." Before Eleanor could respond, the world suddenly spun violently. Her vision darkened at the edges, and she felt her knees begin to buckle. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground, and she found herself pressed against Garrett's chest, breathing in the scent of leather and hay and something clean like soap. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice rumbling through his chest into her ear. "I have got you." "I am sorry," she managed, mortified. "I do not know what happened. Nothing to apologize for. You look about ready to collapse." He adjusted his hold, one arm beneath her knees, the other supporting her back. "When did you last eat something?" "Yesterday morning, I think, maybe the day before." The details blurred together. Garrett's jaw tightened. "That explains it, then." He turned to a young boy standing nearby, watching with wide eyes. "Tommy, grab the lady's trunk and bring it to my wagon, would you? There is a nickel in it for you." The boy scrambled to comply as Garrett carried Eleanor down the street. She knew she should protest, should insist on walking, but exhaustion had soaked into her very bones. The rocking of the stagecoach still seemed to move through her body, and her head ached something fierce. She closed her eyes and let herself be carried, too tired to care what the townspeople might think. "I am taking you to my ranch," Garrett said. "It is about 3 miles outside town. You need rest and food before we discuss anything else." "We are supposed to be married today," Eleanor said weakly, remembering the letter he had sent. "You said in your last letter that we would marry as soon as I arrived. Plans can change. You are in no condition for a wedding right now." His tone brooked no argument. "First thing is getting you well." He settled her gently into the back of a wagon, then climbed up to the driver's seat. The young boy arrived with her trunk, which Garrett secured alongside her. Then they were moving, the wagon wheels creaking as they rolled out of town. Eleanor lay in the wagon bed, watching clouds drift across the endless blue sky. The Nevada landscape stretched out in all directions, vast and brown and dotted with sagebrush. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow despite the summer heat. It was so different from Boston, where buildings crowded together and the ocean sang against the shore. Here, everything felt open and exposed, as though she could see forever. The movement of the wagon was gentler than the stagecoach had been, and Eleanor felt herself drifting. She had not slept properly in days, catching only brief moments of unconsciousness between the jolting and the noise and the fear. Now, with the immediate crisis over and someone else making the decisions, exhaustion pulled her under like a tide. She woke to the sensation of being carried again. The sun had moved lower in the sky, painting everything gold and orange. Garrett held her carefully as he navigated through a doorway into a house that smelled of wood and coffee. "Is there someone here to help?" Eleanor asked, suddenly aware that being alone with a man in his home was highly improper, even if he was her intended husband. "My housekeeper comes 3 times a week, but this is not one of those days," Garrett said. "I know it is not entirely proper, but I am not leaving you alone when you are this worn out. Besides, we will be married soon enough, and then no one can say a word about it." He carried her into a bedroom, surprisingly neat with a large bed covered in a patchwork quilt. He set her down gently on top of the covers and stepped back, maintaining a respectful distance. "Let me get you some water and something to eat," he said. "Do not try to get up, just rest." Eleanor wanted to argue to say she could take care of herself, but the softness of the bed beneath her was too inviting. She closed her eyes for what felt like only a moment, but when she opened them again, Garrett was sitting in a chair beside the bed, holding a cup of water. "Here," he said, sliding one hand behind her shoulders to help her sit up slightly. "Drink slowly." The water was cool and clean, the best thing she had tasted in weeks. She sipped carefully, and Garrett watched her with an expression she could not quite read. Concern, certainly, but something else too. Kindness, perhaps. Genuine care. "Better?" he asked. "Yes, thank you." He set the cup aside and picked up a bowl from the bedside table. "I made some broth. It is not fancy, but it will help settle your stomach." Eleanor accepted the spoon he offered and took a small sip. The broth was rich and savory, warming her from the inside out. She had not realized how cold she felt until the heat began spreading through her body. "This is very good," she said. "I am glad. I am not much of a cook, but I can manage the basics." Garrett leaned back in his chair, watching her eat with a satisfied expression. "Take your time. There is plenty more if you want it." Eleanor ate slowly, feeling strength seep back into her limbs with each spoonful. As her immediate physical needs were met, awareness began to return. She became conscious of how she must look, her dress rumpled and dusty, her hair falling from its pins. She raised one self-conscious hand to her face, knowing her skin must be grimy with travel. "I must look dreadful," she said. "You look tired," Garrett said honestly, "but that is to be expected. 3 weeks on a stagecoach would wear anyone down. I did not want to arrive like this. I wanted to make a good impression. You already have." The sincerity in his voice made her look up, and she found him watching her with those steady blue eyes. "You came all this way based on a few letters and a hope. That takes courage. Real courage, not the kind that comes from carrying a gun or breaking a horse. The kind that matters." Tears stung Eleanor's eyes unexpectedly, and she blinked them back. For weeks she had been holding herself together through sheer will, not allowing herself to break down or question her decision. Now, confronted with genuine kindness, her defenses crumbled. "I was so afraid," she whispered. "What if you were not what you claimed to be? What if I had made a terrible mistake? I have heard stories about women who came west as mail-order brides and found themselves trapped in awful situations. But I had no other choice. My father died last year, and my brother sold the house to pay his debts. He told me I needed to find a husband quickly or find work, and the only work available for a woman like me was in a factory or worse. So when I saw your advertisement, it seemed like providence." Garrett leaned forward, his expression serious. "I want you to know something, Eleanor. You are not trapped here. If you decide this is not what you want, if I am not what you want, I will pay for your passage back to Boston. You came here of your own free will, and you can leave the same way. I am not looking for a servant or a possession. I am looking for a partner, a companion, someone to build a life with. If that is not something you want with me, I will understand." The generosity of the offer shocked her. She had signed a contract of sorts, an agreement to marry him upon her arrival. Most men would have held her to that agreement regardless of her feelings. But Garrett was offering her freedom, even though it would cost him money and leave him right back where he started. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "Why would you let me leave?" "Because forcing someone to stay is not the same as having them choose to stay," Garrett said simply. "I have been alone on this ranch for 5 years, since my father died and left it to me. It is a good life in many ways, but lonely. I wrote to you because I wanted someone to share it with, but a shared life only works if both people want to be there." Eleanor set the empty bowl aside and folded her hands in her lap. Despite her exhaustion, despite her uncertainty, she felt something settle in her chest. This man, this stranger, had just shown her more respect and consideration than anyone had in a long time. "I would like to stay," she said quietly. "At least long enough to know if this could work between us. You have been very kind, and I appreciate that more than you know." Garrett's face broke into a smile, and Eleanor realized it was the first time she had seen him truly smile. It transformed his features, making him look younger and more approachable. "I am glad," he said. "We will take things slow. No need to rush to the altar until you are ready. For now, you need to rest and recover your strength. We can talk more tomorrow." He stood and moved toward the door, but Eleanor stopped him with a question. "Where will you sleep?" "I have got a bedroll. I will sleep in the main room. You take the bed. This is your room. I cannot put you out of your own bed. You can and you will. I have slept on harder surfaces than a floor. Do not worry about me." He paused at the doorway. "If you need anything during the night, just call out. I am a light sleeper." Then he was gone, closing the door softly behind him. Eleanor sat for a moment in the gathering darkness, processing everything that had happened. Then she stood on shaky legs and moved to the window. The view looked out over rolling rangeland, with cattle dotting the landscape like dark stones. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and pink, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold. This was going to be her home, if she chose to make it so. This vast, empty land so different from everything she had known. The thought should have terrified her, but instead she felt a strange sense of possibility. Here, she could be someone new. Here, she could build something that was entirely her own. She turned from the window and noticed a pitcher of water and a basin on the dresser, with a clean cloth folded beside them. Garrett must have brought them while she slept. Gratefully, Eleanor poured water into the basin and began washing away the layers of dust and grime. The water turned gray quickly, but she felt human again by the time she finished. Her trunk had been brought in and sat at the foot of the bed. She opened it and pulled out a clean nightgown, one of the few nice things she still owned. The fabric was soft against her clean skin, and she sighed with relief as she crawled between the sheets. The bed smelled of lavender and sunshine, and she sank into it like a stone into water. Sleep claimed her almost immediately, deep and dreamless. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and bacon. For a moment she could not remember where she was, and panic fluttered in her chest. Then memory returned, and she sat up slowly. Her body still ached from the journey, but the bone-deep exhaustion had eased. She felt almost human again. A soft knock sounded at the door. "Miss Owens, are you awake?" "Yes," she called. "I've got breakfast ready when you are. Take your time. There is no hurry." Eleanor rose and dressed quickly in a simple blue dress, one that was practical rather than fancy. She braided her hair and pinned it up, wishing she had a mirror to check her appearance. Then she opened the door and made her way through the house. The main room was larger than she expected, with a stone fireplace at one end and a sturdy wooden table in the center. Garrett stood at the stove, dishing food onto tin plates. He had shaved since yesterday and his hair was damp as though freshly washed. He looked up when she entered and smiled. "Good morning. I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks, thank you for the bed." "You are welcome. Sit down and eat. We have got bacon, eggs, and biscuits. I am afraid the biscuits are a bit dense. Baking is not my strong suit." Eleanor sat at the table and accepted the plate he offered. The bacon was crispy, the eggs cooked perfectly, and the biscuits, while indeed dense, tasted buttery and good. She ate with genuine appetite, and Garrett watched with obvious satisfaction. "It is good to see you eating properly," he said. "You were too pale yesterday." "I was worried you might have been seriously ill." "Just exhausted and hungry. I feel much better now." She paused, then added, "I want to thank you again for your kindness yesterday. You could have insisted we marry immediately as planned. Many men would have." Garrett shrugged. "Many men are fools. Rushing something as important as marriage makes no sense to me. We need to know each other first, at least a little bit. Marriage is difficult enough without starting it between two complete strangers." "That is a very practical view." "I am a practical man." He refilled her coffee cup. "I thought today, if you feel up to it, I could show you around the ranch, help you get your bearings. Then maybe we could talk about what you are looking for in a marriage, and I can tell you what I am hoping for. See if our expectations match up." "That sounds reasonable." After breakfast, Garrett gave her a tour of the house first. It was solidly built with 4 rooms total, the main living area with the kitchen, his bedroom, which she was currently using, a small office, and a storage room. Everything was neat and functional, if a bit sparse. "I built this house myself 3 years ago," Garrett explained. "The original cabin was too small and falling apart. This is not fancy, but it is sturdy. It will stand for a long time." "It is a good house," Eleanor said honestly. "Very well made." Outside, he showed her the barn where he kept his horses, 6 of them in various stalls. The animals were clearly well cared for, their coats glossy and their eyes bright. Garrett introduced each one by name, and Eleanor could hear the affection in his voice. "That is Juniper there in the corner," he said, pointing to a gentle-looking mare with a white blaze. "She is getting older now, but she is patient and steady. If you want to learn to ride, she would be a good horse to start with." "I have never ridden before," Eleanor admitted. "In Boston, we took carriages or walked. Then I will teach you if you want to learn. Out here, knowing how to ride is important. The ranch is big, and sometimes you need to cover ground quickly." They continued walking, and Garrett showed her the cattle grazing in the near pastures, the chicken coop where a dozen hens scratched and clucked, the vegetable garden that was struggling in the summer heat, and the creek that ran along the eastern boundary of his property. "I've got 200 acres here," Garrett said. "It is not the biggest spread in the area, but it is mine, free and clear. No mortgage, no debt. I run about 100 head of cattle, sell them in the fall. It is enough to make a decent living, especially if I am careful." Eleanor looked out over the land, trying to imagine herself as part of this world. It was so different from what she knew, but something about it called to her. The openness, the honesty of the work, the direct connection between effort and result. In Boston, Her life had been constrained by social expectations and financial limitations. Here, it seemed like anything might be possible. "What would my role be?" she asked. "If we married, what would you expect of me?" Garrett considered the question carefully. "I would hope you would manage the house, cook the meals, tend the garden, maybe care for the chickens, basic household tasks, but I am not looking for a servant. I would want your input on decisions about the ranch. I would want you to feel like this is your home too, not just mine. And I would want companionship, someone to talk to at the end of the day, someone to share the good times and the hard times." "And children?" Eleanor asked, her cheeks flushing slightly at the boldness of the question. "I would like children someday, if that is something you want too. But there is no rush. We would have time to settle into marriage first, to know each other as husband and wife before adding little ones to the mix." He met her eyes directly. "What about you? What are you looking for?" Eleanor took a breath, trying to organize her thoughts. "I want to feel useful. In Boston, toward the end, I felt like a burden. My brother made it clear he resented having to house and feed me. I want to contribute, to have a purpose, and I want respect. I want to be heard when I have an opinion. I am not expecting grand romance or declarations of love, but I would hope for kindness and partnership." "That seems more than reasonable to me," Garrett said. "I can promise you kindness and respect and partnership. As for love, well, I figure that is something that might grow between two people if they treat each other right. It cannot be forced, but it can be nurtured." They walked back toward the house in comfortable silence. Eleanor felt lighter than she had in months, as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. This might actually work. This strange arrangement, this leap into the unknown, might turn into something good. Over the next several days, they fell into a routine. Garrett worked during the day, tending his cattle and maintaining the ranch, while Eleanor explored the house and began making it more homelike. She found fabric in the storage room and sewed curtains for the windows. She reorganized the kitchen to make cooking more efficient. She weeded the struggling garden and coaxed the plants back to health with careful watering. In the evenings, they ate dinner together and talked. Garrett told her about his childhood, how his parents had come west looking for opportunity and carved this ranch out of raw land. His mother had died when he was 12, and his father had raised him alone, teaching him everything about ranching and about being a man. "He was a hard man in some ways," Garrett said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, "but fair. He taught me that your word is everything, and that kindness costs nothing but is worth more than gold. I try to live by those principles." Eleanor shared her own history, though it was harder to talk about. Her father had been a clerk, respectable but never wealthy. When he died, it became clear he had hidden debts to pay for her mother's medical care years earlier. Her brother had inherited those debts along with the house and had handled it poorly, selling everything and still coming up short. "He blamed me," Eleanor said quietly. "He said if I had married when I had the chance, it would have been one less mouth to feed. But the man who wanted to marry me was 40 years older and known for his cruel temper. I could not do it." "You should not have had to," Garrett said firmly. "No woman should have to marry someone who will mistreat her just to have a roof over her head. You made the right choice." It did not feel right at the time. It felt cowardly. It was brave. Saying no when everyone expects you to say yes, that takes real courage. Such conversations drew them closer. Eleanor began to see the man beneath the quiet exterior, the thoughtfulness and integrity that guided him. Garrett, in turn, seemed to appreciate her quick mind and willingness to work. She noticed him watching her sometimes with an expression that made her pulse quicken. On the 6th day after her arrival, Garrett drove her into Ely so she could see the town properly and meet some of the residents. The general store was run by a friendly couple named the Martins who welcomed Eleanor warmly. The schoolteacher, a spinster named Miss Patterson, invited her to tea. The blacksmith, a giant of a man named Joseph, tipped his hat and welcomed her to town. "Garrett is a good man, Mrs. Martin said quietly while Garrett was examining some tools at the other end of the store. "He has been alone too long. It is nice to see him with someone." "We are not married yet," Eleanor said, feeling the need to clarify. "But you will be soon, I imagine." "Anyone can see you two suit each other well." Did they? Eleanor wanted to believe it was true. In just under a week, Garrett had shown her more consideration than anyone had in years. He was patient with her ignorance about ranch life, teaching her without condescension. He listened when she spoke and valued her opinions. He was unfailingly kind. But was that enough for a marriage? That night back at the ranch, Eleanor found herself unable to sleep. She rose and walked quietly into the main room, planning to get some water. She found Garrett sitting at the table, working by lamplight on some kind of accounting ledger. "Could not sleep?" he asked, looking up. "Too many thoughts in my head." She sat down across from him. "May I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you really choose to find a wife through correspondence? A man like you could surely find a woman here in Nevada. You are respectable, you own land, you are kind. Women would be interested." Garrett set down his pencil. "There are not many unmarried women in Ely, and the few who are here have known me since we were children. They see me as a neighbor or a friend, nothing more. And I did not want to chase someone who might feel pressured to accept me because of limited options. With a mail-order arrangement, both people are making a deliberate choice. You chose to come here knowing what you were getting. That felt more honest to me. And you chose me out of all the women who might have responded to your advertisement. I did. Your letter was different from the others. Most of the responses I got were very brief, just stating basic facts. But you wrote about your dreams, about wanting to be useful and valued. You wrote about loving books and gardens and the ocean. You sounded like someone real, someone with depth. I wanted to know more." Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest. "I almost did not send that letter. I thought I had written too much, revealed too much. I nearly threw it away and started over with something more formal. I am glad you did not." Garrett reached across the table and, after a moment's hesitation, laid his hand over hers. "Eleanor, I know we have only known each other less than a week, but I feel like this could work between us. I think we could build something good together. What do you think?" His hand was warm and calloused, strong but gentle. Eleanor looked at their joined hands and thought about everything that had happened since she arrived. The way he had caught her when she collapsed. The care he had taken with her comfort and recovery. The respect he showed her in every interaction. The future he was offering, one where she would be a partner rather than a burden. "I think so too," she said softly. "I would like to try." Garrett smiled, and this time Eleanor smiled back without reservation. Something had shifted between them in that moment, a silent agreement that this was real and worth pursuing. "So," Garrett said, his thumb moving gently across her knuckles, "shall we set a wedding date?" "Yes," Eleanor said. "Yes, let us do that." They decided on a date 2 weeks away, which would give Eleanor time to prepare and allow Garrett to make the necessary arrangements with the minister. The next day, Garrett drove her back into town to meet with Reverend Samuel and his wife Margaret, who would oversee the ceremony. The Reverend was a kind-faced man in his 50s with gray threading through his dark hair. His wife was younger, probably in her early 40s, with sharp but friendly eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "We are very pleased to meet you, Miss Owens," Reverend Samuel said. "Garrett has told us a bit about your situation. We wanted to make sure you are entering into this marriage of your own free will without coercion." "I am," Eleanor assured them. Garrett has been nothing but respectful and kind. Margaret nodded approvingly. That is good to hear. Marriage is a sacred covenant, but it should also be a partnership built on mutual respect and affection. Do you understand what will be expected of you as a wife? They spent the next hour discussing the realities of married life, both the spiritual aspects and the practical ones. Margaret was refreshingly frank about subjects many women would not discuss openly, and Eleanor appreciated the honesty. By the time they left, she felt better prepared for what lay ahead. Over the following 2 weeks, Eleanor threw herself into preparations. With money Garrett gave her, she purchased fabric and sewed herself a simple wedding dress in pale blue. She cleaned the house until it gleamed. She practiced cooking more elaborate meals, wanting to prove she could manage a household properly. Mrs. Martin and several other women from town came out to visit, ostensibly to welcome her, but clearly also to assess whether she was a suitable match for Garrett. Eleanor bore their scrutiny with as much grace as she could muster, answering their questions honestly and trying not to feel like a specimen under glass. "You will do well here," Mrs. Martin said finally, after the other women had left. "You have got backbone. That is important in this country. The West is not for the faint of heart." "I am learning that," Eleanor said. "Garrett is lucky to have found you. I hope you know you are lucky too. That man has been proposed to by half the mothers in the county trying to match him with their daughters. He could have had his pick, but he waited for the right woman. He waited for you." The words stayed with Eleanor long after Mrs. Martin left. She had been so focused on her own leap of faith, her own risk in coming west, that she had not fully considered Garrett's perspective. He had taken a chance too, investing money and hope in a stranger. He could have ended up with someone incompatible, someone who made his life miserable. Instead, he got her. She hoped she would prove worthy of the faith he had shown. The night before the wedding, Eleanor lay awake long into the darkness, her mind racing. Tomorrow she would become someone's wife. She would take vows to honor and obey, to cleave unto him for the rest of her life. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. A soft knock sounded at the door and Garrett's voice came through. "Eleanor, are you all right? I saw the lamplight under the door." She rose and opened the door, finding him standing there in his nightshirt, hair mussed from sleep. "I am sorry if I woke you. I am just nervous about tomorrow." "So am I," he admitted. "Can I come in for a moment? I promise to be proper." She nodded and stepped back, leaving the door open for propriety's sake. Garrett stayed near the doorway, maintaining a respectful distance. "I want you to know something," he said. "Tomorrow, when we take our vows, I will mean every word. I will do my best to be a good husband to you, to provide for you and protect you and value you. I know I am not perfect. I can be stubborn sometimes, and I am sure there will be times when I frustrate you or disappoint you. But I will always try to do right by you. You have my word on that." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "I will do my best to be a good wife to you, to make a home for us, to support you in your work, to be the partner you are looking for. I am sure I will make mistakes too. I know nothing about ranching and I will probably do 100 things wrong, but I will try. I will really try. That is all anyone can do." Garrett took a step closer, then another, until he stood directly in front of her. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, he reached up and cupped her face in his hands. His palms were warm against her cheeks, his touch gentle. "May I kiss you?" her heart hammered. "Yes." He leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, soft and sweet and careful. It was Eleanor's first real kiss, and it made her feel dizzy and warm and safe all at once. When he pulled back, she swayed slightly, and he steadied her with his hands. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "you will be my wife, and I will do everything in my power to make you happy." Then he was gone, leaving her standing there with her fingers pressed to her lips, feeling like the world had just tilted on its axis. The wedding took place at noon the next day in the small church in Ely. Eleanor wore her blue dress and carried a small bouquet of wildflowers that Garrett had picked that morning. He wore a black suit that must have been his best, and he had gotten a fresh haircut for the occasion. He looked handsome and serious as he stood at the altar waiting for her. The church was not crowded, but a respectable number of people had come. Mrs. Martin and her husband, Miss Patterson the schoolteacher, the blacksmith Joseph and his family, and several other townspeople Eleanor had met. They all watched with friendly smiles as she walked down the aisle on legs that trembled only slightly. Reverend Samuel performed the ceremony with solemn dignity. The words were traditional, the vows ancient. Eleanor spoke her promises clearly, and Garrett's voice was steady and strong as he spoke his. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Garrett kissed her gently, mindful of their audience. Afterward, there was a small celebration at the Martins' home, with cake and lemonade and good wishes all around. Eleanor found herself swept up in conversations with the women, who gave her advice about everything from cooking with altitude adjustments to dealing with the harsh winter winds. The men clapped Garrett on the back and made jokes that made him blush. As the afternoon waned, Garrett caught Eleanor's eye and gestured toward the door. She nodded gratefully, ready to leave the crowded celebration. They said their goodbyes and thanked everyone for coming, then climbed into Garrett's wagon for the ride home. The word felt strange and new and right all at once. This was her home now, and Garrett was her husband. The reality of it washed over her as they drove through the fading light. "Tired?" Garrett asked, a little. "It has been a long day." "A good day, though." "Yes," she agreed. "A very good day." When they reached the ranch, Garrett helped her down from the wagon with his hands on her waist, and this time she leaned into his touch without hesitation. They were married now. They were allowed to touch, to be close. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Inside the house, Eleanor noticed that Garrett had moved his things into the smaller storage room, converting it into a makeshift bedroom for himself. She turned to him in confusion. "What is this?" "I thought you might want time to adjust," Garrett said. "To being married to this life. I am in no rush to claim my marital rights. When you are ready, you can tell me. Until then, I will sleep in there and you can keep the main bedroom." Eleanor stared at him, overwhelmed by this latest demonstration of his consideration. Most men would have insisted on their rights immediately, especially after wading through a courtship. But here was Garrett, offering her space and time and choice. She crossed the room to him and took his hands in hers. "You are the kindest man I have ever known. I just want you to be comfortable. I am comfortable, more comfortable than I have been in a very long time." She took a breath, gathering her courage. "And I do not want you to sleep in there. You are my husband now. We should share a room." "Are you certain?" "I am certain." Garrett lifted one hand and brushed his fingers along her cheek, his touch feather light. "Then we will share a room, but we will go at your pace. There is no rush for anything." That night, they lay together in the big bed, and Garrett held her with careful tenderness as they navigated this new intimacy. He was patient and gentle, mindful of her inexperience and nervousness. When they finally came together as husband and wife, it was with mutual care and growing affection. Afterward, Eleanor lay with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and thought that she might be the luckiest woman in Nevada territory. The weeks that followed were an adjustment in countless ways. Eleanor learned the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings and long days, the endless work that kept everything running. She learned to ride Juniper, the patient mare, at first terrified and then gradually confident. She learned to manage the chickens, to bake bread that rose properly in the high altitude, to preserve vegetables for the winter. Garrett proved to be a patient teacher, showing her what she needed to know without making her feel stupid for not knowing it already. He praised her successes and helped her learn from her failures. Slowly but surely, Eleanor began to feel competent in her new role. Their marriage deepened too. What had started as careful friendship and mutual respect began to grow into something warmer. Garrett's touch became more confident, and Eleanor found herself seeking out his affection rather than just accepting it. They learned each other's habits and preferences, the small details that make a shared life work. One evening in late August, about 6 weeks after their wedding, Eleanor found herself sitting on the porch watching the sunset with Garrett beside her. His arm was around her shoulders, and she was tucked against his side, perfectly content. "I have been thinking," Garrett said. "Next spring, I want to expand the cattle operation. Maybe bring the herd up to 150 head. It would mean more work, but also more income. What do you think?" "I think it sounds like a good plan. Would you need to hire help?" "Probably for the busy seasons, spring calving and fall roundup. But we could manage the rest of the time on our own." Eleanor considered this. "If we are bringing in more income, I would like to invest some of it in the garden. Maybe build a proper greenhouse so we can grow vegetables year-round. And perhaps we could get a milk cow. Fresh milk and butter would be wonderful." "Those are good ideas. A greenhouse especially. That would make a real difference during the winter." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "See, this is what I meant about partnership. Your ideas make the ranch better. So do yours." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn from orange to pink to purple. Then Garrett said quietly, "Are you happy here, Eleanor? Truly?" She tilted her head to look up at him. "I am. Happier than I ever thought I would be when I got on that stagecoach in Boston. I was so frightened then. Terrified, really. I thought I was making the worst mistake of my life. And now I think it was the best decision I ever made." She reached up and cupped his face in her hand. "You have given me so much, Garrett. A home, a purpose, respect, kindness. I do not think I ever properly thanked you for that. You do not need to thank me. Being with you, building this life with you, that is all the thanks I need." He turned his head and kissed her palm. "I love you, Eleanor. I did not think it would happen so quickly, but it did. I love you." The words hit her like a warm wave, and she felt tears spring to her eyes. "I love you too. I think I have for a while now, but I was afraid to say it, afraid it was too soon or that you might not feel the same way. Well, now you know. I feel exactly the same way." He pulled her fully into his lap, and she went willingly, wrapping her arms around his neck. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me." They kissed there on the porch as the stars began to emerge overhead, and Eleanor felt complete in a way she never had before. This was where she belonged. This was home. As autumn arrived, painting the distant mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Eleanor threw herself into preparing for winter. She preserved vegetables, smoked meat, made soap and candles. Garrett taught her to shoot, both for protection and to help provide game meat for their table. She turned out to be a decent shot, much to his surprise and her own. "You have got a steady hand," he said after she hit the target 3 times in a row. "Better than me when I was learning. I think it is because I am not trying to impress anyone. I am just focusing on the task." "Well, whatever you are doing, keep doing it." In October, they made the trip to the larger town of Elko for supplies before winter closed in. It was Eleanor's first real expedition beyond Ely, and she marveled at the landscape they passed through. The high desert was harsh but beautiful in its own way, with vast stretches of sagebrush and sudden dramatic rock formations. In Elko, They visited a proper dry goods store where Eleanor was able to buy fabric, thread, and other supplies she had been wanting. Garrett bought new tools and a stack of books, knowing how much Eleanor missed having things to read during the long evenings. "We will come back in the spring," he promised as they loaded the wagon. "Make it a regular trip, maybe every season. I do not want you to feel isolated out at the ranch." "I do not feel isolated," Eleanor said honestly. "But I appreciate the thought, and it is nice to have an adventure now and then." On the way home, they stopped to camp overnight since the journey was too long to make in a single day. Garrett built a fire and they cooked beans and bacon over the flames, eating under a canopy of stars that seemed close enough to touch. "Tell me about your dreams," Garrett said as they lay wrapped in blankets, watching the fire burn down to coals. "What did you imagine your life would be like when you were a girl?" Eleanor thought about it. "I thought I would marry someone respectable, probably a clerk or a shopkeeper like my father. I thought I would live in a city, in a nice house with neighbors close by. I thought I would have children, maybe 3 or 4. I thought my life would be small but secure." Are you disappointed that it turned out differently? Not at all. This life is harder in many ways than what I imagined, but it is also bigger and more meaningful. I feel like what I do matters here. Every meal I cook, every plant I nurture, every skill I learn, it all contributes directly to our survival and prosperity. In Boston, I felt useless, like I was just taking up space. Here, I have a purpose. Garrett pulled her closer. "You would have had a purpose anywhere, Eleanor. You are too smart and capable not to, but I am glad you found your purpose here with me." As winter set in, the ranch became a small world unto itself. Snow fell heavy and deep, isolating them from town for weeks at a time, but Eleanor did not mind. The house was warm and well-stocked, and she had Garrett for company. They spent long evenings reading aloud to each other, playing cards, talking about everything and nothing. Garrett taught her to play chess, and she proved to be a quick study, beating him within a month. He pretended to be offended, but she could see the pride in his eyes. "Where did you learn strategy like that?" he demanded after she checkmated him for the 3rd game in a row. "I watched you play. I learned your patterns." "That is not fair. You are supposed to be learning the game, not learning me." "Why not both?" She smiled sweetly, and he laughed, pulling her in for a kiss. In January, a winter storm rolled in worse than anything they had experienced so far. The wind howled like a living thing, and snow piled against the windows. They lost 2 chickens to the cold despite their best efforts, and Garrett spent hours each day making sure the horses and the cattle that stayed close to the barn had enough food and water. Eleanor worried about him every time he went out into the blinding white. She made him promise to tie a rope from the house to the barn so he could find his way back if the snow got too thick to see through. "I will be fine," he assured her. "I have been through plenty of winter storms." "I know. But you did not have a wife who would worry herself sick if anything happened to you." He kissed her forehead. "Fair point. I will tie the rope." When he came back in from his tasks, she would have hot coffee and food waiting, and she would help him out of his snow-crusted coat and boots. They would sit close to the fire, and she would warm his cold hands between hers. "What would I do without you?" he murmured one evening, exhausted from a particularly difficult day. "You would manage. You managed before I came. I managed, but I did not thrive. There is a difference." The storm finally broke after 5 days, leaving everything buried under 4 feet of snow. But the sky was clear and blindingly blue, and the silence was profound. Garrett and Eleanor stood on the porch, looking out at the transformed landscape. "It is beautiful," Eleanor said softly. "Like another world. It is, but I will be glad when spring comes. I am ready for green growing things again. So am I." As winter slowly gave way to early spring, Eleanor began to notice changes in her body. She was tired more than usual, and certain smells made her stomach turn. At first she thought she might be coming down with an illness, but then her monthly courses failed to arrive. Twice. She sat on the edge of the bed one morning, her hand pressed to her flat stomach, hardly daring to believe it. A baby. She was going to have a baby. The realization brought a flood of emotions. Joy, certainly, excitement, but also fear. Childbirth was dangerous, especially out here far from doctors. Women died bringing children into the world, and even if she survived the birth, what kind of mother would she be? She had no experience with babies. Garrett found her there, tears streaming down her face, and immediately knelt in front of her in alarm. "What is wrong? Are you hurt?" "No, I am not hurt. I am pregnant." His eyes went wide. "Pregnant? You are certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor confirming it. All the signs are there." For a moment Garrett just stared at her. Then a huge grin spread across his face, and he let out a whoop of joy that made Eleanor laugh despite her tears. He pulled her into his arms and spun her around, kissing her face all over. "We are going to have a baby." "Eleanor, that is wonderful. You are not frightened. Why would I be frightened? Because childbirth is dangerous. Because I do not know anything about being a mother. Because everything could go wrong." Garrett set her down gently and took her face in his hands. "Listen to me. Yes, there are risks, but women have been having babies since the beginning of time. We will get through this together. We will bring the doctor out from Elko when it is time. We will ask the experienced mothers in town for advice. And you are going to be a wonderful mother, I have no doubt about that." His confidence steadied her. "You really think so?" "I know so. You are smart and capable and full of love. Our child will be lucky to have you." Eleanor leaned into him, letting his strength support her. "I love you. I love you too, so much." News of the pregnancy spread quickly once they told people in town. The women especially rallied around Eleanor, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and promises to help when the time came. Margaret, the Reverend's wife, had assisted with many births and promised to be there when Eleanor's time came. "You are young and healthy," Margaret said reassuringly. "I expect you will do just fine, but I will be there to help, just in case." As Eleanor's belly grew through the spring and into summer, Garrett became almost comically protective. He would not let her lift anything heavy, insisted she rest in the afternoons, and fretted if she so much as winced. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Eleanor said with amusement after he scolded her for trying to carry a bucket of water. "I know. But I cannot help worrying. You are carrying my child. You are precious cargo." Despite her protests, Eleanor secretly loved the attention. She had never felt so treasured, so valued. Garrett treated her like she was the most important person in the world, and his joy about the coming baby was infectious. He began working on a cradle in his spare time, carefully shaping and sanding the wood until it was smooth as silk. He showed it to Eleanor one evening, his expression shy and hopeful. "What do you think?" "It is beautiful, perfect." She ran her fingers over the carefully carved edges. "Our baby is lucky to have you as a father. I am going to do my best. That is all I can promise." That is all anyone can do. In late September, when the leaves were turning and the air carried a hint of autumn chill, Eleanor's labor began. It started slowly, with mild cramping that gradually intensified over several hours. Garrett immediately rode into town to fetch Margaret, and several other women came as well, including Mrs. Martin. The labor lasted through the night and into the next day, long hours of pain that tested Eleanor's endurance. But Margaret was experienced and calm, coaching her through the contractions, assuring her that everything was progressing normally. Garrett paced outside the bedroom, not allowed in but unable to go far. Every time Eleanor cried out, he flinched. Mrs. Martin finally took pity on him and brought him coffee and made him sit down. She is strong, Mrs. Martin said. She will be fine. How do you know? Because I have seen her face down every challenge that comes her way. A woman who can leave everything she knows and build a new life in a strange place has the strength to bring a child into the world. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, Eleanor gave a final tremendous push, and the baby emerged. A few seconds of terrifying silence, then a loud, healthy cry that made Eleanor sob with relief. You have a son, Margaret announced, laying the squalling infant on Eleanor's chest. A big, healthy boy. Eleanor looked down at her son through tears, overwhelmed by love so intense it was almost painful. He was red and wrinkled and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in indignation at being pushed into the cold world. The door burst open and Garrett rushed in, propriety forgotten. He froze at the sight of Eleanor holding their son, his face transforming with wonder. Come meet your son, Eleanor said softly. Garrett approached slowly, as though afraid he might break the spell. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby, and tears spilled down his cheeks unashamedly. He is perfect, Garrett whispered. Absolutely perfect. What should we name him? Eleanor asked. They had discussed names but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at their son, Garrett said, What about Thomas? After my father, Thomas Callahan. I like it. Eleanor shifted the baby slightly so Garrett could hold him. Here, hold your son. Garrett took the infant with trembling hands, cradling him against his chest. The baby quieted immediately, perhaps recognizing his father's heartbeat. They stayed like that for a long moment, the three of them together, a family. Margaret and the other women quietly left, giving them privacy. Finally, they were alone with their son. I was so frightened, Eleanor admitted. I thought I might die, or the baby might die, or something would go horribly wrong. But you did not die. You both came through perfectly. Garrett looked at her with such love and admiration that it took her breath away. You are the strongest person I know. I am just glad it is over. And that he is here and healthy. Little Thomas proved to be a good baby, sleeping in reasonable stretches and nursing well. Eleanor was exhausted but happy, marveling at the tiny person they had created. Garrett was besotted, spending every spare moment gazing at his son with naked adoration. I never knew I could love something this much, he said one night as he rocked Thomas to sleep. It is almost frightening how much I love him. I know exactly what you mean. As autumn deepened into winter, they settled into their new routine as parents. It was exhausting and wonderful and occasionally overwhelming. Thomas had a healthy pair of lungs and was not shy about using them when he wanted something. But between the two of them, Garrett and Eleanor managed. The women from town visited regularly, bringing food and gifts and advice. Eleanor was grateful for the support, for the sense of community that surrounded them. She had worried about being isolated, but instead she found herself part of something larger, a network of people who looked out for each other. On Thomas's first Christmas, when he was just over 3 months old, Garrett presented Eleanor with a beautiful shawl he had purchased on a supply run to Elko. It is not much, he said, but I wanted you to have something special. It is perfect. Eleanor wrapped the soft wool around her shoulders. Thank you. No, thank you for coming here, for taking a chance on me, for giving me a family. You have made my life complete, Eleanor. I hope you know that. You have done the same for me. When I stepped off that stagecoach, I was lost and frightened and alone. You gave me a home and a purpose and love. So much love. They kissed while Thomas dozed in his cradle, and Eleanor thought about how far she had come. A little over a year ago, she had arrived in Ely exhausted and uncertain, with nothing but a trunk of belongings and a desperate hope. Now she had a husband who cherished her, a son she adored, and a life she had built with her own hands. The years passed in a blur of work and joy and the ordinary miracles of daily life. Thomas grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. He learned to walk, to talk, to help with small chores around the ranch. 2 years after Thomas was born, Eleanor had a daughter they named Sarah, and 2 years after that, another son named James. The ranch prospered. Garrett expanded the herd as planned, and Eleanor's garden grew more productive every year. They built the greenhouse she had wanted, and it provided fresh vegetables even in the depths of winter. They bought the milk cow and then several more, starting a small dairy operation that brought in additional income. Life was not always easy. There were years when drought threatened the cattle, seasons when illness swept through the animals, times when money was tight and worry kept them awake at night. But they faced every challenge together, as partners. Eleanor became a respected member of the community, known for her competence and her kindness. She helped deliver babies when Margaret was unavailable, served on the church committee, and taught reading to children whose parents could not afford schooling. Garrett served as a volunteer deputy during times when the town needed extra law enforcement, and was elected to the town council. On their 10th anniversary, Garrett took Eleanor on a trip to San Francisco, leaving the children with Margaret and her husband. It was Eleanor's first time seeing the ocean since leaving Boston, and she stood on the shore with tears streaming down her face, breathing in the salt air. "I had forgotten how much I missed this," she said. "You regret leaving?" Garrett asked. "Do you ever wish you had stayed in Boston?" Eleanor turned to him, this man who had become her entire world. His face was weathered now, with lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun. Gray threaded through his hair at the temples. But he was still the same man who had caught her when she fell, who had treated her with such tender care, who had made her feel treasured every single day. "Not for 1 second," she said firmly. "Boston was my past. You and the children and the ranch, that is my future. That is my life. And I would not trade it for anything." Garrett pulled her close and kissed her there on the beach, with the waves crashing and the gulls crying overhead. "I love you, Eleanor Callahan." "I love you too, Garrett Callahan. Always." When they returned to the ranch, the children rushed to meet them, full of stories about everything that had happened while they were gone. Thomas, now 10, had taken his role as the oldest seriously and had helped keep his younger siblings in line. Sarah, 8, had made a new dress for her doll. James, 6, had found a turtle and wanted to keep it as a pet. Eleanor hugged each of them tightly, breathing in their familiar scents. This was her family, her home, her life. It was not the life she had imagined as a young girl in Boston, but it was infinitely better. As the children grew older, they each developed their own interests and talents. Thomas loved working with the cattle and had a natural gift for reading the weather. Sarah was artistic and spent hours sketching the landscape and the animals. James was the adventurer, always exploring and getting into mischief. Eleanor and Garrett watched their children grow with pride and occasional terror, knowing they would soon be launching into their own lives. But for now, they were all together, a family bound by love and mutual support. On a warm evening in late spring, when Thomas was 15 and beginning to talk about his future, the whole family gathered on the porch after dinner. This had become their tradition, this evening time together to talk and share and simply be present with each other. "I have been thinking," Thomas said, "about what I want to do with my life." "And what have you decided?" Garrett asked. "I want to stay here. I want to help run the ranch, expand it maybe. I love this land and this life. I cannot imagine being anywhere else." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. Her son, choosing the life his parents had built, choosing to continue the legacy they had started. "We would be honored to have you stay," Garrett said, his voice rough with emotion. "There is plenty of room for your ideas and your ambitions. We can build this ranch into something even greater together." Sarah spoke up next. "I want to go to San Francisco to study art. I know that is unusual, but I think I could be good enough to sell my work." "Then you should go," Eleanor said immediately. "Follow your passion, sweetheart." "We will support you." James, still only 13, shrugged. "I do not know what I want yet, but I like that we get to choose, that you are letting us decide for ourselves." "Of course we are," Garrett said. "We want you to be happy and fulfilled, whatever that looks like for each of you. That is what matters most." As the sun set and the stars emerged, Eleanor leaned against Garrett's shoulder and reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 20 years ago, she had stepped off a stagecoach, exhausted and uncertain, with nothing but hope and desperation driving her forward. She had been terrified of making a mistake, of ending up trapped in a life she could not escape. Instead, she had found everything she never knew she wanted. A husband who loved and respected her. Children who filled her days with purpose and joy. A community that accepted and valued her. A home that she had built with her own hands and heart. "What are you thinking about?" Garrett asked softly. "How lucky I am. How everything that seemed so frightening and uncertain turned out to be exactly what I needed. I am the lucky one. You took a chance on a stranger and turned his lonely house into a home. We are both lucky then." The children started singing a song they had learned at school, their voices blending in the gathering darkness. Eleanor joined in, and then Garrett, his deep bass anchoring the melody. They sang together under the vast Nevada sky, a family united by love and choice and the daily decision to build a life together. Years continued to pass in their steady rhythm. Thomas brought home a young woman named Mary when he was 22, and they married in a ceremony that filled the church in Ely. Sarah went to San Francisco as planned and found success as an illustrator, her drawings appearing in magazines and books. James eventually decided to become a veterinarian, traveling to the East Coast for his education, and then returning to Nevada to practice. Eleanor and Garrett became grandparents, first to Thomas and Mary's twin boys, then to Sarah's daughter, and eventually to 3 more grandchildren from James. The ranch house echoed with the sound of children again, and Eleanor found just as much joy in her grandchildren as she had in her own children. As they entered their 60s, both Eleanor and Garrett began to slow down. They turned more of the daily operations of the ranch over to Thomas, who had indeed expanded it into something impressive. They spent their days working in the garden, reading, taking long walks around the property. "Can you believe it has been 40 years since you arrived?" Garrett said one afternoon as they sat in their favorite spot on the porch. 40 years since I caught you when you fainted in front of the general store. 40 years, Eleanor repeated, marveling at it. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like just yesterday. Regrets? Not a single one. What about you? My only regret is that we do not have another 40 years ahead of us. Garrett took her hand, his fingers still strong despite the arthritis that had begun to set in. But I am grateful for every day I've had with you. You are the great love of my life, Eleanor. And you are mine. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching their grandchildren play in the yard under Mary's watchful eye. The mountains stood eternal in the distance, and the ranch spread out before them like a living testament to everything they had built. Eleanor thought about that frightened young woman who had arrived so long ago, exhausted and uncertain. If she could go back and tell that woman what lay ahead, would she believe it? Would she understand that stepping off that stagecoach was not the end of her old life, but the beginning of her real life? "Thank you," Eleanor said suddenly. "For what?" "For being exactly who you said you were in your letters. For treating me with kindness when I arrived. For making me feel treasured every single day of our marriage. For giving me this beautiful life." Garrett lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You gave me just as much. More, even. You gave me love and family and purpose. You made a house into a home. You made my life complete." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Eleanor leaned her head on Garrett's shoulder. She felt his arm come around her, holding her close, just as he had done countless times over the 40 years of their marriage. This was what she had come so far to find, though she had not known it when she began her journey. Not just a husband or a home, but a true partnership. A love that grew deeper with every passing year. A life built on mutual respect and affection, and the daily choice to honor their vows. The children and grandchildren called them in for dinner, and Eleanor and Garrett rose slowly, their bodies no longer as spry as they once were. But their hands were linked, and their hearts were united, and they walked into the house together, into the warmth and light and love that filled every corner. The mail-order bride who had arrived exhausted and uncertain had become a woman of strength and substance. The cowboy who had offered tender care had become a beloved husband and father and grandfather. Together, they had built something that would last long after they were gone, a legacy of love and family and hard work that would echo through generations. As they sat down to dinner surrounded by their children and grandchildren, with laughter and conversation filling the air, Eleanor caught Garrett's eye across the table. He smiled at her, that same gentle smile that had made her feel safe and treasured from the very beginning. She smiled back, her heart full to overflowing. This was happiness. This was home. This was the life she had dreamed of without knowing she was dreaming. And every moment of the difficult journey that had brought her here, every moment of uncertainty and fear had been worth it for this, for love, for family, for a life well lived in partnership with a man who treasured her, for the cowboy who had caught her when she fell and had held her steady ever since, for Garrett, her husband, her partner, her love, forever.